Good morning and welcome. We're going to give the Zoom chat a little time to populate, and then we'll start in a minute. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's program. In Solidarity and Strength, a webinar series launched by the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles. Through these monthly webinars, participants get to gain an insight into the perspectives and topics that address Israeli resistance, responses to anti-Semitism, Jewish communal organizing, and an array of other current issues that are important to us as the Jewish community. I'm Joanna Mendelson. I'm the Senior Vice President for Community Engagement here at Jewish Federation LA. It is my honor to bring to you today's webinar, From Crisis to Hope, the Refugee Story and Our Jewish Advocacy Responsibility. Welcoming the stranger is a core principle of Judaism and an ideal in which America was founded. Many of our Jewish stories are refugee stories. And today, JFED LA is going to bring to you a topic highlighting some incredible experts to shed light on this current topic. JFED LA has a long-standing history of working to support Jewish refugees. How can we together better understand the experiences of individuals who are forcibly displaced from their homeland? What is our role as Jews and Americans in advocating for humane and just resettlement policies and procedures? What is happening locally, and how can we be involved? So we encourage you to submit questions throughout today's conversation using the webinar's Q&A function, and Becky Silverman-Stern, our moderator today, will direct the questions to the various panelists. Please welcome our moderator, Becky Silverman-Stern, the Executive Vice President and Chief Impact Officer for the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles. Becky oversees all programmatic initiatives and partnerships of the Federation and has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to our strategy on these issues. Becky, thank you so much for guiding today's conversation, and I turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Joanna, and thank you to all of you online for joining us for this super important conversation. As the Chief Impact Officer, I just want to provide some framing before we get into discussion with all of our guests today, and to remind you just a little bit about JFED LA's purpose for being. We act on shared values to create safe, joyful, and connected Jewish life in LA, in Israel, and around the world. We care deeply for our vulnerable by addressing poverty and combating anti-Semitism. We inspire by fostering Jewish journeys, building bridges, and developing leaders. And through this conversation, you'll see all of those values come alive. Building upon our history, and listen, context and history is so important, the Jewish Federation has played a strategic role in ensuring that any Jewish refugee seeking safety in LA is provided vital social services to build a healthy, productive life here in this wonderful city in which we all live. Since 1973, so we're going back in history a bit, the Jewish Federation with its partners, many of whom are on the phone with us, on Zoom with us, on the webinar today, have advocated for and welcomed more than 27,000 refugees from the former Soviet Union and Iran to our city of Los Angeles. These efforts are also what has led to the founding of the State of Israel, and it continues. In 2024, the refugee story, whether from Iran, whether from Ukraine or elsewhere, maintains that our Jewish advocacy responsibility is as important as ever, and we are pleased to be able to amplify the efforts to support refugees as we highlight several professionals who are on the front lines of this very important work. So now, let's begin our conversation at the personal level with a story, with a real life story, by understanding firsthand the refugee experience. Joining us for the first part of our discussion today are Mandana Dayani, human rights activist, business leader, and the creator and co-founder of I Am a Voter, a national, nonpartisan civic engagement organization. Mandana Dayani has joined us today to share her Jewish refugee story. She's going to do that in conversation and facilitated by Joe Goldman, the Community Engagement Director for Western Region of HIAS and a partner of JFED LA. So with that, I turn the conversation and storytelling component of this webinar over to Joe and Mandana.
Thank you so much, Becky, and it's wonderful to be here with Mandana and with all of you this morning, especially Mandana. Thank you. I know we are in a very busy and topsy-turvy time in our world, to put it mildly. Again, my name is Joe Goldman. I'm at HIAS, we're the world's oldest refugee resettlement agency, working with people, forcibly displaced people of all backgrounds across 5 continents and over 23 countries. And even most recently, given everything in the news, I just wanted to share we've helped over 189,000 people displaced within Israel by this war since October 7th, since I know that's on a lot of folks' hearts and minds, although we are meeting in this moment in the midst of HIAS Refugee Shabbat season. Although not during Shabbat. And I'm thrilled we could be here with Mandana, who, like me, is a resident here of Los Angeles. And I'd love for Mandana, you are a former HIAS client, and you've been doing so much advocacy in a lot of different arenas, including fighting anti-Semitism and so on. Can you share with us just, in conversation here, a bit about yourself, where you're from, and a bit of your story, and I'll pepper in with questions. We'll keep it a conversation.
Sounds good. Hi, Joe. And thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work that you do. I think I'm the biggest, highest fan of all time, so always a privilege to be able to do this with you. I don't even know where to start. I was born in Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. So obviously you can imagine it was like very hard time under the regime that is still there now. Compulsory hijabs, morality police, it was not easy. And then ultimately my family and I were able to flee. I think I was like 5.5 years old. My dad needed to have surgery. He had an injury and went to France. We went to Italy, to this little town called Displaced, which a lot of refugees apparently go and resettle from, and stayed with some neighbors on their couch. My mom actually volunteered at the local HIAS hub in Italy, and we applied for asylum to the US. And my dad eventually came back like a month later and was with us. We probably stayed there, I would say like 7-8 months. And then through HIAS, we gained asylum to the US. And so we arrived in New York. HIAS literally greeted us and helped my brother and I be placed in a yeshiva pro bono so that we could go to school and continue some Jewish learning. None of us spoke English, so it was obviously like a very difficult transition. They helped my dad with a job placement, and I think we all lived in like a little studio in Queens until we were able to start work and rebuild our lives again. But I think I've been raised my entire life with this tremendous sense of gratitude and patriotism to, I think, America for saving our lives, and also I think to HIAS for creating that bridge and opportunity for us to be here today.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And one of the things I love about my job is just meeting so many former clients, who share a lot of similar stories, and it's very, very humbling, and I so appreciate hearing that. And I'd be curious, you shared you first went to New York. What brought you to LA? I'm glad you came here, but what brought you to LA versus staying in New York?
Yeah, I think to be honest, my dad's relative called him and said that Beverly Hills had the best public schools. So my dad came to LA with like an envelope of whatever cash we had and sort of like walked the perimeter of what was Beverly Hills, so he could find an apartment that would take us, because we had no credit. So ultimately it was another refugee from China that was the landlord of that building who like saw my dad's panic and said, I will take a chance on you. I will help you, and rented us that apartment. And so then we got on a plane a couple weeks later. We came out here and enrolled in the Beverly Hills public school system. And then my dad got another job, and we started to rebuild our lives again. Definitely were raised with this like idea of the American dream. So I was told that I had to be an attorney. My brother was told that he had to be, a doctor of some sort. And so it was very, it was hard, but I think it was definitely the community that got us through a lot of those times and helped us rebuild our lives. And I think one of the things that's actually like so beautiful is like, even when I came to LA and then I enrolled in this like public school, my first, and who's still one of my closest friends, is Ukrainian and came to the US through Highest. And then another one of our friends is Ukrainian and came to the US. And so that it's been such like an important part, I think, of my life and story. And then I've had about like 10 careers since.
Amazing. Well, I'm really glad you mentioned the credit piece, that what your father experienced in looking for housing, because that's something that refugees to this day, and I know we'll hear from Jackie Mentor later at one of our local partners, that is one of like the biggest challenges still, all these years later, that when refugees come to this country and they're trying to rebuild new lives, but they don't come here with credit scores, right? It's not and it's one of these things. I think it's one of the many pieces that is underappreciated, even among those of us who are like in this to welcome the stranger and welcome folks who are fleeing for their lives, that we don't even think about like how much of a difference that can make, just to find housing, in the cities that you're trying to, rebuild your life. And you mentioned you've had 10 careers, and so, but your Jewish identity is definitely like intertwined with so much of a lot of what your work has been over the years in different ways. And it'd be great to kind of hear, not just, in addition to the refugee experience, like how your Jewish identity has shaped your commitment to so many of the different things that you do, especially in this moment.
Yeah. So I started my career as an attorney, and then I worked as a talent agent, really working with celebrities and helping them, turn into brands. And then I went in-house for client. And I would say over the course of several years, helped build brands in fashion, media, entertainment, and tech. I was on parental leave with my second daughter when the child separation policy happened. And I think that was the most like almost out of body existential like crisis I had experienced since I'd been here. And I think part of coming to the US was this understanding and appreciation that like America saved my life. This is the greatest country in the world, right? And to see myself in some of these children, right? Like I arrived in the US and I remember holding, like New York is the scariest thing I'd ever seen, right? Like the lights, the sound, the horns, like I didn't understand what anyone was saying. And I just held my mom's hand and I was like, I'm going to be okay. And to think about like what these migrants have gone through for months just to arrive here for the promise of safety, which we literally put on our Statue of Liberty. Like we told them to come here. And the absolute worst thing you could ever do to a human being is take their child away. Like I would rather someone do anything on earth to me, right? Like, and we lost them. I mean, we treated luggage better than we treated these children. We had no system in place. And I couldn't reconcile the country that I loved with this policy. And I got on a plane, I went to Tornillo, Texas, where the first camp was, and went in. And I think that was the beginning of understanding that like something about us was broken and we had lost like a sense of humanity in just our politics and the way that we govern. I came back, I was sitting on a bunch of different boards at the time. So I started taking meetings with senators and congressmen, trying to figure out like how to restore some humanity into this issue. And I was told over and over that the easiest way to have like real systemic long-term change would be higher voter turnout. I did not think that was hard given my career background. And so I brought together about 25 of the smartest women I've ever worked with, and then CA, the talent agency, which joined as my co-founders. And then we launched I'm a Voter. And that was really focused on, it was a nonpartisan organization, getting more people to vote on issues that they care about. I ran that for about 4 years. And then during which I did that, podcast with my best friend on activism and how people can show up. And then I went to go work at Archwell and we gave that grant to Highest, and that was really fun. So I helped build out all like those departments. And then I was there about 1.5 years. And I would say in this last year, I've been doing a lot more of political work again. And then October 7th really completely reshifted my entire existence, again, as like a very progressive activist who stood like at the forefront of like every single social justice issue. I couldn't, not no part of my brain could reconcile what happened on October 7th and the response on October 7th, on October 8th, on October 9th. Like it was immediate. And that was really hard because I think as someone who's left Iran to come here, you sort of like, you understand the importance of being able to be Jewish because it wasn't safe there to be Jewish, and that's why we left. And so the promise of that safety was so important, and the acceptance of like being Jewish was so important to my existence. But also, like, I think what so many don't appreciate is that for all of us in diaspora, like the idea of Israel is what makes us feel safe. Like it is a core part of our identity, this idea that like they're not going to come for us because we have a nation to protect us for the first time. And so, yeah, it was really, I was like very heartbroken by continued response, I think, to what happened October 7th.
Yeah, October 7th definitely for so many has been obviously a very deeply painful experience on so many levels. And I think talking about the humanity issues and the even just the Jewish history interlinked with the issues we're talking about today with, for refugees and asylum seekers, the forcibly displaced, the fact that the right to seek asylum was established by the international community, through the UN, which I know we have a lot of challenging relationships with. And I know, Mandana, you've done a lot of work with holding them to account on many different fronts. In addition, but I always joke, I'm like, whatever, all the other issues we have, at least they did establish the right to seek asylum and the refugee resettlement system, at least in our understanding of it, and has been codified under US law, and under treaties signed by Israel that allowed for people to seek safety in the US and in Israel. It allowed us to, allow Jews to seek safety and shelter. And also those treaties were written by Holocaust survivors. And it's incredible that these issues are so intertwined with Jewish safety, in addition to Jews caring about the wider world. They are intrinsic to the existence of so many people, including you and many others in the American Jewish community, and have helped facilitate a significantly safer aliyot to Israel in ways that we underappreciate, and at the same time, it's been so painful to see the tide of anti-Semitism just so in our faces in a lot of these same institutions. And I know for me, working at a place at a humanitarian organization, it's been really challenging to navigate this time. And I'd be curious, given what you've gone through and the activism that you've done, especially in the last few months, how do you see tides changing or not in this moment? And I think in closing, kind of what do you see your work looking like this year, especially in this tumultuous time? That's a big question, but I think but I know you, and I know you're going to be very very active these days, so I'd love for you to share with us what you think the coming weeks and months look like for you.
Sorry, so I think there are a couple questions there, and I'll try to answer them quickly. I think a lot about like actually what you have on your website at Highest, right? This idea of welcome the stranger, which is such an integral part of Judaism. And this idea of like our Shabbat tables and our open doors, and come and, take us in. And, I believe like I can walk into any Jewish family's home around the world, and they would just like welcome me with open arms and give me food and a place to stay, right? Like, and that is so integral to who we are as people. And that is, and I was always so moved by that statement on your site. I think that, we as Jewish people need to remind people of who we are and what we contribute and who our values are. I think so much of what we need to continue to do is share the joy of our traditions and bring more people into them. I think we talk a lot about, the respect that we want to have because of people before us that had really tragic fates. But I feel like in order for us to feel more protected and a part of like the global community, we need greater appreciation and understanding of who we are as a people and what we contribute, right? And, when you think about Israel, it is like this incredible democracy that bloomed in the middle of all of these very complex, regions and countries that do not hold the same values, right? Like we're a nation of ideas and innovation, and we preach hope and resilience, and like families at the center of all of this. And we look at, like the amount of things that we built and thrived through. And, I think that we represent so much of what is so important about Western values, and then we still like anchor them in these like beautiful ancient traditions. And even when like the worst things in the world happen, like we still sing and we dance and we show up and we hold hands. And I just think there's so much about who we are as a people that we don't share enough of. And I think it's hard to expect the world to have, to understand a population that is so small, right? Like we're 0.2% of the world's population. When they don't like know us. And it's funny because some part of me, the way that I was raised for so long as a child was like, be quiet, don't rock the boat, like as Jews, we were always like, keep it quiet. And I think that has to shift. I think that like we are at a point in time where it's more important than ever that we invite others in. And we are much, much more open than we've been in the past.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Well, I know you have a very, very busy schedule ahead of you every single day. And so I am happy to pass this back to Becky. But Mandana, thank you for being with us. I'm so grateful, as always. Keep up the great fight and the great work that you do every single day. We're cheering you on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Mandana. Mandana, you just spoke so beautifully about how your experience has influenced everything you do today. You talked deeply about values and philosophy and the global world today, but we also know that bringing refugees to safety, there's some practicality involved. There's some real specific steps that are taken. And so for this portion of our conversation, I welcome our remaining panelists who are deeply in the trenches, taking care of your refugees and advocating for refugees. And first is Jackie Mentor, the Director of Refugee and Resettlement at Jewish Family Services, Family and Children's Services of Long Beach and West Orange County, and David Bacarsley, Executive Director of the Jewish Public Affairs Committee of California, recently back from Israel. So first and foremost, let's give everybody on this webinar a bit of an introduction to what each of your organizations do, because you're two prongs of how we get this work done, both in the advocacy space and then actually working with refugees to make sure that they are resettled as best they can. So Jackie, let's start with you.
Hi, Becky. First, I want to thank the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles for hosting this important webinar, and thank Mandana for sharing her story and the wonderful work that she has been doing. So I'm in charge of the new refugee resettlement program at Jewish Family and Children's Services of Long Beach and Orange County. And we started just a month ago. We received our second and third families last night from LAX, both families arriving from Afghanistan. While I've been involved in this work of working with refugees for some 8 years now, our program at JFCS is new, but it's also not new. JFCS in Long Beach was a highest resettlement partner up until 29 years ago. JFCS was also resettling refugees from the former Soviet Union. And as that tapered off, so did their resettlement program. So we're very happy to bring back this program now, based in Orange County, but we are also serving refugee families in Los Angeles as well. And essentially, what we do is, from the moment refugees arrive, we meet them and greet them at the airport. And if you can imagine leaving your home country, coming here to the United States, and you may or may not speak the language, and all of a sudden you have to start over from zero, regardless of what your age is. find a place to live. And that's one of the challenges that Mandana mentioned. This is the greatest obstacle and challenge to refugee resettlement agencies in the United States across the country. So we have a number of mechanisms to help make that transition a little bit easier and support these families to find safe housing and affordable housing. And how would, as a newcomer who doesn't speak the English, doesn't have a job, even know where to start? So
Becky,
this is where we start.
while we have you, just tell us a little bit more about the specific services that you provide. I think that would be extremely important for everyone to hear.
Specifically going down the main short list, it's helping refugees find housing, helping them learn how to navigate the systems and bureaucracies in the United States, getting them signed up for the benefits to which they're entitled, food stamps, CalWorks, financial assistance from the government, Medi-Cal, medical insurance, helping get their children enrolled in public schools. And also, very importantly, helping them navigate how to find jobs. And without a job, they won't become financially self-sustainable. And that is our goal, to provide compassionate care while helping them rebuild their lives amongst all of these new challenges.
So thank you. Thank you to you and every one of your team members for the compassion that you show and the specifics. However, before a refugee arrives, there is quite a bit of advocacy that is done. And so, David, you may want to talk a little bit about the role of your organization and how that plays into this conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Becky. And thanks to the JFLA for having me. And I want to echo all of Jackie's thanks for everyone on this call, too. So I run JPAC. We serve as the unified voice of the Jewish community to the state government in California. And we're a coalition of 32 major Jewish organizations from across the state. And we proudly include the 3 other organizations here in our coalition, JFLA, HIAS, and JFCS Long Beach and Orange County, as part of our coalition, as well as all of the major Jewish federations, JCRCs, Jewish Family Service Agencies, and other groups like ADL, AJC, Hadassah. I can give you an alphabet soup of Jewish organizations that are proudly part of our coalition. And what we do is we lobby the state government on behalf of core Jewish community issues, like countering anti-Semitism and hate, Holocaust education, and supporting Israel, and core Jewish community values, like fighting hunger and poverty, and relevant to today, supporting refugees and asylum seekers. And so we'll talk a little bit more in this conversation about a number of the different bills and budget items that we really push the state government to invest in the refugee work that so many of these organizations are doing.
David, keep going with some of those details on those bills while we have you.
Sure. So you want me to jump into what the actual bills we're working on right now?
Please.
Sure. So well, I'm sure we'll hear more from Joe and Jackie about some of the incredible work happening at the federal level, which I know HIAS is intimately involved in, and the actual resettlement and critical services that are provided by Jackie and JFCS and our other family service agencies. But there's so much work that the state can and does do to support the work that's happening on the ground. So notably, one major piece of legislation that we're working on now is a bill called SB 85. And this is a bill authored by Senator Scott Wiener. He's the chair of the state legislature's Jewish caucus, and that would extend case management for refugees. Now, the federal government provides 90 days of case management currently, and we know that 90 days is simply not enough for people who are moving, as Jackie said, to a new country, possibly speaking a new language, to find housing, jobs, healthcare, and other social services. So we're asking the state to step up and provide another 90 days or more, depending on need, to make sure refugees in our state are cared for and set up for success. This bill has been moving its way through the legislature for the last year. It got out of the first house, the Senate, and we'll be spending the next several months advocating for it in the second house in the Assembly. And we also are continuing to support resources for the incredible asylum seeker shelter run by Jewish Family Services in San Diego. Now, asylum seekers are a different legal classification than refugees, but they too are people fleeing persecution from their home country and seeking legal resettlement in the U.S. And the state has provided tens of millions of dollars every year to ensure that asylum seekers are supported and provided resources that they need to prosper here in California. But this year, the state is faced with a major budget deficit, and funding to this JFS shelter is significantly threatened. So we'll be lobbying the state to ensure that this critical program isn't forced to shutter as well. And I know that all of our member organizations will join us in our lobbying efforts and would benefit from all of the communal support that we can get, that we'll be offering via Action Alerts and our conference in Sacramento in the coming months.
So David, tell us when we should all be in Sacramento with you.
We're jumping in. I love this. So we have a major annual conference in Sacramento called JPAC Capital Summit. It's May 14th to 15th. May 14th to 15th. It's a Tuesday to a Wednesday, where we bring up hundreds and hundreds of Jewish communal leaders from across the state. These are organizational CEOs and board members and staffers. These are rabbis and community leaders. These are young professionals and students. People from across the spectrum of California Jewish life come up and make a really strong demonstration of the power of the Jewish voice. And so for 2 days, we'll be going through an incredible networking experience. We'll be meeting with dozens and dozens of elected officials and community experts, hearing from them, getting keynote speeches, listening to panels. And then we actually learn about what the issues are that we'll be lobbying on, and take those skills and put them into practice. And we'll lobby the vast majority of California state legislature. In the past couple of years alone, this program has manifested over $250 million in state support for Jewish community priorities. And I know that it makes a huge difference when we have a strong representation in Sacramento. So we certainly urge people to come and join us for our conference, May 14th to 15th.
Jackie and Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything when it comes to the federal advocacy that we all do together.
Sure. Well, first, I want to say just how much of a huge partner JPAC is to HIAS and how grateful I am to JFED LA for its enormous support of JPAC. I could not imagine the work that HIAS does in California without JPAC. And so I really want to double down. I really hope everyone will join us in Sacramento in May. That is extremely important. If there's anything you leave this call, it's considering going to Sacramento in May. As you know, there's a lot of advocacy that is going on. We have seen this issue become really painfully politicized in ways that are unrecognizable from when Mandana came to the United States. When just a few years before Mandana's arrival, the U.S. Congress had unanimously codified the U.S. Refugee Act, which set forward the refugee system and asylum system as we know it today. It's hard to imagine Congress unanimously agreeing on anything in today's environment. And that is like a nonpartisan fact at this moment. That's just the reality we're living with. And so where we have been really active and continue to be, we actually have HIAS Advocacy Week coming up in the first week of April, which I'm happy to share with others. And JFED LA, through its partnership with JFNA, has been a fantastic partner with us in addressing a lot of the challenges of ensuring that we have, humane ways for folks to be able to seek asylum without it being pitted against critical humanitarian aid that so many of us care about. And so we've really been in the thick of that. But I think that it would be useful in this moment to just give a very, very brief overview of the difference between a refugee, asylum seeker, and forcibly displaced person, because we're using these terms a lot and they're very confusing. And these are things that even in my almost 5 years at HIAS, I often will find myself mixing them up. And so I want to make sure that we have the same understanding. So a refugee is someone, as you've heard from David, someone who's fleeing persecution on the basis of their religion, nationality, ethnicity, political opinion. They could also be fleeing on the basis of being a member of a particular social group, like LGBTQ people. A refugee has fled country A for country B. So say they fled Iran and they're in Italy, in Mandana's case. If they're lucky, they are, and they will be among a very, very, very small number of folks who are invited to be resettled in the United States. These are people, when they are invited to be resettled by the State Department, they are vetted extensively. It is like a 2-year-long process for most people today by multiple departments in the US government for security purposes before they are then resettled by an agency. HIAS is one of the 10 agencies that partners with the State Department. And instead of opening an office in every city in which we do resettlement, because we are so old, we have all these pre-existing relationships with a lot of Jewish family service agencies throughout the country and a few non-Jewish agencies as well, to resettle those refugees who are assigned to us by the State Department. And so a refugee goes through that whole pipeline and they are on a pathway to permanency. But these are, on a pathway to permanency that can lead to citizenship over a 6 to 7 year period after their arrival. These are folks who, again, are vetted before arrival, and they're a teeny tiny number of all the immigrants who come to the United States. We resettled about 60,000 refugees last year as a whole country. When you think about it, on average, we typically naturalize about 900,000 to 1 million US citizens each year. So it's a very tiny number. Asylum seekers are fleeing the same reasons, the same reasons someone who's a refugee has fled. However, they did not have the opportunity to necessarily go to a second country and be able to seek refuge, be designated as a refugee by the UN. The asylum process was actually, again, created in direct response to what happened to Jews in the Holocaust, because there were too many of us who needed to be able to just pick up and go and seek refuge and do so by presenting ourselves in the country that we're seeking refuge in, have our cases adjudicated once we arrived. And so those are asylum seekers. Once they are approved, and it is a very, very lengthy process, it's even longer in certain ways than what refugees go through, because our immigration system has not received the investments that it needs for asylum officers and things like that. It has really been a far more challenging dynamic, and we've seen that process far more politicized. And then finally, forcibly displaced people. They might be refugees, so to speak, in their own country, but they have not left their country. And I think the forcibly displaced people in Israel are a perfect example. They may not be able to live near the Gaza envelope or in the north like they once did for now. And so they are being helped, within Israel. They are still the responsibility of Israel, but we obviously, as a humanitarian agency, are stepping up to help those people. And you see that whether it's in Ukraine, throughout Latin America, and so on. So I just want to provide that context and for what we're looking at this from a global and national angle. I don't know, Jackie, if you had anything else you wanted to add there.
Joe, you did a great job on explaining those differences and nuances. I would just go back for a minute or so to some of the advocacy issues of importance to refugees and HIAS and resettlement agencies on the broader national level. And there are several bills, and there are several issues that don't yet have bills that we really need. One is the Afghan Adjustment Act that we have been trying to pass for some 3 years now, which would help those Afghan evacuees who came here pretty much immediately after the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. And while we received those evacuees, they were not technically refugees. Another category that an immigration category that Joe didn't discuss is humanitarian parolee, which is used in situations where there is a dire humanitarian crisis. And so I don't know the exact number, maybe Joe, you know the number, but no, actually it was over 80,000 Afghans were evacuated here pretty much immediately. And rather than granting them refugee status and all that entails with a pathway to permanent residency in the United States, they have to apply for asylum, which, as Joe mentioned, is an even greater, longer, lengthier process for an even more overloaded system. And this is kind of a slap in the face and an insult to those Afghans who, were our allies. And so the Afghan Adjustment Act is one of those national bills. The presidential determination each year, the president determines how many refugees the United States will resettle each year. President Biden has brought that number back up to 125,000 refugees as the ceiling to resettle this year and the previous year. However, we have not reached that number. So part of our job as advocates for refugees is to encourage and hold the administration accountable to reaching that goal of 125,000 refugees in each given fiscal year. And as Joe mentioned, the number of refugees resettled throughout the world annually is something like 0.01% of all of the refugees globally. It's literally a drop in the ocean. Yet every life we save in this way is vital and important, and we have to keep doing this important work.
Jackie, maybe you could translate some of those numbers for us to the Los Angeles area. Give us a sense of scope, give us a sense of demographics, and then I might add on top of that, you, as somebody who has so much expertise working with different populations, talk to us a little bit about cultural sensitivities. One day you could be greeting somebody who has arrived from Afghanistan, and hopefully very shortly you'll be meeting folks that are arriving from Iran. So, your team, your staff, you have to, you take care of everyone, and we are so deeply grateful. But tell us what that's like, what your resources are like, and give us a sense of scope coming to the Los Angeles area over the next, let's say, 6 months.
Okay, so specific numbers, I don't have all of them off the top of my head. What I can tell you is that California is one of the states, along with Texas and New York, that resettles the highest number of refugees in the country. And Joe, if you have these numbers at your fingertips, please jump in and share. Our personal goal for our resettlement agency for our first year is to resettle 150 individual refugees. That will probably be around 30 to 40 refugee families. There are 3 resettlement agencies in Los Angeles. There are now 3, thank goodness, again in Orange County after several years where there was only one. Long story. And now there's a new resettlement agency that has just opened in San Bernardino County, and one more that will hopefully be coming on board that will cover Los Angeles and the Inland Empire and Orange County. We resettle refugees within a 100-mile radius. So when I first took this job, I thought, oh, great, we'll be settling refugees in Orange County. The reality is we will be resettling and are resettling within Orange County, the Inland Empire, and Los Angeles, which really puts a strain on our very small staff. The geography makes it harder. Obviously, there's a lot more time, and you know what driving in Southern California is like, and our time is so limited. So that's a little bit about the demographics. Now, not only are we working with refugees, we're also working with some Ukrainians who have come as humanitarian parolees, which is that other status I mentioned before, as a result of and I think in 3 days it will be the second anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So the Uniting for Ukraine program that was launched to allow Ukrainians to come in. We are also working with that population as well as refugees with a very small staff. We have 2 case managers at this point. Now, you asked about cultural sensitivities and working with populations from all around the world. The population and cultural sensitivities of Iran and Afghanistan, which you referred to, are really quite similar to each other. And also, if you put it in the context of our Jewish history and more conservative and more orthodox Jewish traditions, it's not all that different. You know, women and men, depending on how observant a Muslim family is, women and men may not shake hands or hug like Orthodox Jews who are not family members. Some traditional women will cover their hair with a shadur. Some may be extremely traditional and wear a burqa and cover their entire face. And as it's our job to accept refugees from anywhere and of any background without judgment, doesn't matter what their religion or culture is. And to understand those sensitivities, understand many of our Afghan, Iranian, and other Middle Eastern clients will want halal food, just as Jewish refugees have wanted kosher food. So there's really quite a similarity between Muslim and Jewish refugee with regard to those sensitivities. So, and Ukrainians are a little different, just because the country of Ukraine is a little more modern than Afghanistan, coming from a very rural area of Afghanistan or Kurdistan in Iran. So these clients from Ukraine are more familiar with, for instance, credit cards or bank accounts that not all Middle Eastern clients, some yes, but not all, will be familiar with these aspects of navigating life here in America.
Thanks, Jackie. What an expert we have here. She has worked with every population, but maybe Joe or Jackie, you can talk a little bit more about the numbers that we see coming to California, Southern California, Los Angeles, when it comes to the Iranian Jewish community.
Sure. So the Lautenberg program you heard earlier was not renewed by Congress, unfortunately, last in September. However, there were still over 10,000 people in the Lautenberg pipeline who had been, they've been enrolled in the program since even before 2017, and anyone who enrolled before September 30th of last year was able to, that they are in the pipeline. Unfortunately, despite the fact that in Iran, it has become a very untenable situation for Jews and other religious minorities, particularly since October 7th, the Lautenberg program is not an emergency program. And so that does, but that leads to a lot of, understandable anxiety and frustration because we want to get folks out. And Hayes is continuing to work with the governments involved to increase staffing for processing in Vienna and in Zagreb, Croatia. We do know that of the approximately, say it's 10 to 13,000 people in this pipeline, about 70% of them will be heading to Los Angeles. Now, not all of them are Jewish. In fact, it's a substantial minority. It's just a minority of that population is Jewish. But still, it is incredible. You're going to have Baha'i, Zoroastrian, Christians who tend to be also ethnically Armenian. And so, we are going to have, over the coming years, we will be seeing a substantial increase in folks coming to LA from Iran. And the reason that we know that they're coming to greater Los Angeles is because the Lautenberg program is based on local local contacts. It's based on having a local anchor relationship, whether it's a member of your family or unique to this program, even a friend. Most programs require it to be family members. And so we know that there will be a lot of people coming directly to Los Angeles, and which I think is really exciting, not just for the families involved, but also because we see the enormous benefits of welcoming refugees to our city. Being a host community is such a privilege and a blessing for us economically and culturally. And so and that's just from one country alone, and it's a country that a lot of us, are, familiar with, either because we fled from there ourselves or have friends or family who have come from there, and we see just how much the immigrant communities from Iran have added to Los Angeles. Just imagine other communities as well, and what they bring to our city is just extraordinary. So I'm really excited about it.
I'm going to shift our conversation ever so a little bit, and this question is for all of you. There's a lot happening in the world. A lot of it not so great, as we have talked about. 10/7, impact of 10/7, the crisis in Ukraine. Maybe each of you want to reflect a little bit about how these geopolitical and some of our own domestic issues are ramping up and affecting your work, right? What happens in the world affects your work in particular so deeply. So David, you've gotten to rest your voice a bit. Maybe you want to respond first.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's actually a really interesting one from my lens, because we do work at the state level, and the state is largely not responsible for thinking about global policy or foreign relations, but it makes an impact on the state. It makes an impact on California, on Los Angeles, and the Southern California region in general. And so when it does, it's really important for us to get involved. As we know, obviously, October 7th transcends all political ideologies, levels of government, et cetera. It has impacted every single one of us in the Jewish community and beyond. You mentioned at the beginning, I just got back a couple of days ago from a trip that was supported by both us, JFED-LA and JCRC Bay Area, where we brought 7 state legislators to Israel to witness the atrocities that Hamas committed on October 7th. And it was one of the hardest trips I've ever been on to Israel, but it was life-changing for me and all of the legislators on the trip. As communal leaders, they will have the responsibility, the burden of having to come back and being able to recount what they saw, and be an ally to our community, to be able to share what the Israeli community and the Jewish community globally is going through. We're also seeing the impacts of rising anti-Semitism locally as a result of what's happening in Israel, as well as what we're seeing in some of the other wars around the world and what's happening domestically. And so we're working really hard on the state level to work with the governor to create a all of society plan to counter anti-Semitism, to put bills on the legislature's docket that will ultimately help make sure that our students are protected in our schools and higher education, and in the workplace as well. And we are all touched by what's happening globally, and so we need to make sure that at every level of government and every aspect of society, we're attuned to what's happening in the world, and making sure that those issues are addressed, that Californians, particularly Jewish Californians, and our vulnerable partners are able to make sure that they're secure and prosper.
Joe, Jackie?
I'm happy to go. Or Jackie, do you want to go next, or?
You go, I'll talk after you.
That'd be great. So I will say it absolutely has been a devastating times, and this is even after, at highest, we're also active in Chad, where we've been helping people fleeing a genocide in Sudan. This is the second genocide now in the last almost 20 years, and no one was talking about it. We're dealing with crises all over the world that people still aren't talking about, and at the same time, highest would not be able to do the work that we do, helping people of all backgrounds around the world, if Israel didn't exist, because Israel's existence vastly accelerated and brought into the reality of the reality that the vast majority of global Jewry now has political freedom of movement. It is an extraordinary miracle that once we achieved that moment, really between Israel's establishment and the collapse of the former Soviet Union, that by the turn of this past century, that we reached that moment that we were able to help people fleeing all kinds of geopolitical challenges around the world. And I think especially after October 7th, my hope, and I know a lot of us at Highest are really looking at this, is that especially as we are on the ground, helping folks who are directly impacted by the war in Israel, also refusing to let the atrocities and the responses to those atrocities that have been so alienating and so difficult to comprehend, we are not going to let those things take away from who we are as Jews and change our values. Because we also know that the values of welcoming the stranger, they're not just nice to have things. These are things that are intrinsic to who we are as Jews and being practicing Jews. And they are intrinsic to our safety. And they are core to building coalitions with the many wonderful non-Jewish communities who are and have been and will be our allies for the years to come. And so really keeping that North Star, which is so hard right now. I know I've lost friends over significant political differences over the past 4 months, and it's been hard working with a number of partner organizations and colleagues, but we can't let this take away who we are, because if we do that, the extremists win, and that cannot be. And so that's been one of the things that has really been a guiding light for me in this work. Since October 7th.
And beautifully said. Jackie, you have something you want to add?
Yeah, it's hard to add as eloquently as what Joe said. But yes, we partner with other faith-based organizations, and these other faith-based organizations also share the same value of welcoming the stranger, yet have noticed a strain with those organizations that tend to sympathize with the Palestinians and their suffering with what has been happening as a result of the attack on Israel on October 7th. So having to separate whatever our own personal political opinions may be with regard to Israel, having to completely separate that from our working collectively and productively and efficiently with other organizations, regardless of what their political stance may be on that issue, is a bit of a challenge. But we're figuring out how to navigate that. The other question you asked about how does this global refugee crisis affect us locally? I might be slightly paraphrasing your question, Becky. But one example, for instance, David referred to SB 85, not SB 85. First of all, thank you for your work on that. We really need those funds to extend case management for refugees, but also funding for the asylum seeker shelter that Jewish Family Service San Diego and partner organizations have been running for several years for asylum seekers coming in through the southern border. And just because of where we live geographically, we are affected by what happens at our southern border. And if funding is diminished or lost for that shelter, and I already see it happening, those asylum seekers will not have access to that immediate refuge after being released from CPB and USCIS and immigration detention. And our organization, are already receiving calls from volunteers and clients who are asylum seekers coming from San Diego. And that will only increase exponentially if chas v'chalila, that shelter does not receive additional funding. And our resettlement agency does not have funding to support asylum seekers, and it's very difficult to turn these vulnerable vulnerable people away when there is little to no financial resources for asylum seekers, unfortunately.
So to all of you, thank you for what you do each and every day. And for those of you online, understand that this is a mosaic. We do all of this work together in partnership, and each of us plays a critical role. And so with that, I turn this back to Joanna Mendelson, the Federation Senior Vice President for Community Engagement.
Thank you so much for our esteemed, thank you so much for our esteemed panelists, and gratitude for them all sharing their knowledge, participating in today's conversation. We are really grateful for your insight and your time, as well as the important work that you're doing on these very critical issues. Thank you all to our audience for tuning in. This webinar will be available on our website beginning tomorrow, so we encourage you to share the link with others who didn't have the chance to tune in. Our next webinar session is focused on understanding ethnic studies and its relevance to the Jewish community. Stay tuned for registration information. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.